Jordan, and I just finished my first year of veterinary school, and that means I have 3 more years of vet school left. And once I graduate, I know I want to work with small animals, but I'm not sure if I want to specialize or what I want to do after, but luckily I still have some time to figure it out.
Hi, my name is Chanel Burns, and I am just about to start veterinary school in about 2 weeks, so I still have 4 more years to go. And as of now, I'm thinking I want to specialize in surgery and working primarily with small animals, so like your dogs and cats and more so your household pets.
So today we have a presentation about animal behavior and a little bit about the evolution of dogs and where they came from and how they came to be the pets that we have today.
So today we're going to talk about the domestication of dogs. So how did we get wolves from dogs? So the first thing most people think about when they're thinking about evolution is natural selection. So Charles Darwin and the finches. So this is the process by which biological traits become more common or less common in a given population. So if you look at the picture there, you see natural selection in a nutshell. So it's all the green little beetles are getting eaten because they're the favorite ones, and the orange ones are getting to stick around. So later on throughout the generations, green beetles no longer exist because they've been eaten, and now all that we have left is orange beetles.
So artificial selection is very similar to natural selection, except we're making the decisions. So it's not the birds have a favorite color of beetle, but it's we have a favorite way we want our dog to look. So for pugs, we wanted them to have those big eyes, big heads. For Labradors, we bred them for specific personalities or specific jobs. So what we did is we took what we wanted in the dogs and bred those two together. So then we kept getting the genes that we wanted, and they kept progressing the way that we wanted, and that's how we made these specific, very different breeds.
So domesticating wolves, there are 2 popular theories out right now, and the first one is that orphan pups were actually rescued by the people. So the mamas went away and the little pups were left around, and we actually ended up taking care of them and domesticating them ourselves.
And then the second theory is going to be that we went ahead and there were wolves that were around our communities, and they were very social and very brave. So they were scavenging off of our food scraps. And then those wolves eventually became more integrated into our society and eventually became more and more domesticated and became the dogs that we know today.
Either way, certain behavioral traits were favored and selected for. So what most people wanted when looking for a wild wolf would be that they're gentle with people, that they're playful, that they're basically not going to attack you or harm you in any way.
So there's actually a scientist named Dr. Dmitry Belyaev, and he was in Russia, and he was working on a fox farm, and they raised foxes for their fur. And what he did is he took the foxes, and he didn't like how aggressive they were to the humans. So he took the foxes that were more gentle and bred them together over and over, and saw what happened over the generations.
So why did the fox's physical appearance start to change? So what really happened when Dr. Belyaev was selecting the foxes was that through artificial selection, was that many scientists believe that these changes were related to selection for tameness, were caused by lower adrenaline production in the new breed, which caused physiological changes in very few generations, and thus yielding genetic combinations not present in the original species. So basically, to sum that up, those tamer animals had lower adrenaline, which caused them to look more like dogs today.
So what this means is that the selection for tameness, it made changes in those foxes that were influential on the emergence of those other dog-like traits. So they raised their tails, they would bark, they started to get other traits that aren't common in foxes. So it's kind of interesting that over just a few generations, I always assumed that it took a really long time to see these changes, but he did it in a really short amount of time. And he found that these foxes started to not only to behave more like gentle dogs, but also to look like dogs.
So the foxes in Dr. Belyaev's experiment, we found out that the physical traits and unexpected behaviors were linked to the behavioral traits in wolves.
So what that means is, without intending to, humans made wolves start to look like dogs. So they had floppier ears, they had softer coats, they barked, which is actually not a common behavior for wolves to have.
So how did this happen? This happened through the genetic linkage, which is the tendency that genes that are close together in a chromosome are inherited together during meiosis. So like we said, the lower adrenaline production also led to tameness. It also led to more dog-like traits.
But what this brings us to is all the different dog breeds. So there are tons of dog breeds out there. I'm sure we're all familiar with the basic ones, but there's even more than you can imagine. And so if anyone has any guesses about how many dog breeds there are out there, what we have right now recognized by the AKC is going to be 178 dog breeds. And that's actually not encompassing of all the dog breeds out there because it takes them a while to recognize the different lines. So there could be a lot more breeds out there, especially kind of the designer breeds like schnoodles, schnauzer poodles, things like that. Those aren't recognized, but we kind of view those as breeds too. So there's a lot out there.
So little is known about early dogs, although they were known as land races, which is natural breeds, which developed over time with minimal human intervention.
So with the beginnings of agriculture around 12,000 years ago, humans actually began making use of dogs in different ways, and that kind of spurred the beginning of that artificial selection because we had different jobs for them, so we wanted to select differently. We weren't just selecting for how they looked, we were selecting for more of what they could do, their body type, how they acted, how they responded to long days of working.
So dog breeds in the modern sense date only to the accurate documenting of pedigrees and the establishment of the English Kennel Club in 1832. See Wallace Shirley, founder of the EKC, so that's him right there. So basically, not all the dog breeds that we have today or documented are all the ones that exist. This is just the latest that they've been documenting them.
So from the beginning of time, we've used animals in our lives. So in the beginning, dogs were used to drive livestock since the Neolithic times. And then the circuses of early Rome featured trained animals like elephants and lions and chariot horses. And homing pigeons have been used for a really long time, as early as 2350 BC in Mesopotamia. And the Vikings were training horses in the 19th century. So what all of that kind of has in common, if you can figure it out, is animal training. And we're going to talk a little bit about how to train our animals so that y'all can be really good at it and y'all can have a good understanding of what's going on in your animal's mind when you're trying to teach them to do a trick.
So we're going to go through the normal behaviors of dogs. That way you can recognize what is abnormal or what you should look out for. So happy dogs, they're generally panting, they have a relaxed expression, their tail is wagging, they like to play bow, and their tail starts thumping.
And then dogs that are going to be very anxious have very different behaviors. They'll have one paw raised. I kind of like to think of it as they're ready to kind of run immediately. They will tuck their tail. They can lick a lot, which is a sign of anxiousness that a lot of people don't know. They'll lick their face, they'll lick their lips. They can even urinate or defecate if they're very, very nervous. So that's kind of something to look out for because some dogs, they might pee when they get really excited when you get home. But if they're really scared, they can also do that as well.
So aggressive dogs. Normally they would lunge at you, they might be starting to snap, they can snarl, their head is a little bit lower than normal, and they begin barking.
So cats have kind of similar behaviors, but there are a few pretty key differences that it's helpful to be able to recognize. One of the main things is I personally don't ever like to approach a cat. I like the cat to approach me because if it's not approaching me, he probably doesn't want me to chase him and try and pet him. So that's a really good thing for people to know. And then in addition to that, cats will purr. So they can purr, they'll roll over on their back, kind of expose their belly for the rubbings there. And they have a vertical tail. So when they're happy, their tail will be vertical. It's not wagging like a dog's tail when he's happy.
So aggressive cats, some things to look out for is growling or hissing, tail swishing, spitting, and swiping at you. So basically their little claws would come out and they'd kind of claw at you.
So there's a lot of different distances that animals experience that we kind of do in our daily lives too. We just don't think about it. So I don't know if anyone has a bubble. Whenever somebody gets too close to me, it's kind of natural to just move away because you don't want someone in your bubble. And so animals kind of have the same thing. They're a lot more perceptive than we are. So they have a lot of different distances. So the distance that you are from an animal when they perceive you, and then when they kind of start to react to you. We're going to go through all those different distances with y'all and explain them so you understand what's happening if you ever were to approach a strange animal or a strange dog.
So perceptive distance is the distance when the animal realizes that it's being approached. So this is when it first sees you and it sees that you may be walking towards it.
And then after that, we're going to have the approach distance. So that's whenever the animal has recognized you and they start to approach you to see and try and get a better view. So if you ever watch like scary movies, when they go into the door where they heard the sound and you're like, why are you doing that? Well, they want to get a closer look. So it's kind of the same that we do. They want to investigate what that weird noise was.
So flight distance is when the approacher gets close enough that causes the animal to flee. And the point of balance is which was determined which way the animal moves. The point of balance is when if you're right here and the dog is right here, if you start walking towards it this way, it's going to walk in the opposite way. So it's basically like a little teeter-totter of like if you go this way, it's going to go opposite from you. It's the point of balance. So they're trying to kind of keep their distance in that way, which they're going to mirror you.
So the next distance that we're going to talk about is going to be our withdrawal distance. So that's the distance of how far they're going to move back away from you before they reassess. So before they turn around and they look, are you still following me? Is this still a threat? They kind of try and reassess the situation.
So critical distance is the point where the approacher is attacked instead of the animal running away from them. So rapid approaches are more likely to result in this behavior since there is little distance between the fight and the critical distance. And it's also more likely that the animal cannot escape. So if you're walking towards an animal and they kind of have their backs against the wall, their first instinct is going to be to bite you just because they have nowhere to run. So the same thing also happens if you run through all the little zones really quickly. They don't have enough time to adapt or adjust to the change in the distances, and they might attack you.
So the common phrase is fight or flight, and if they don't have any room to flight, then they're always going to fight. So it's a big deal because we deal with animals in kennels a lot. So whenever we have to get an animal out of the kennel, it's important to move very slowly and let them get used to you. Or if you're at an animal shelter or anything like that. Because if you reach in really quick, you don't know what's going to happen because they can get really scared.
So strike distance is how far the animal can actually reach you during an attack. So depending on the different breed, it can be between a foot, maybe a couple feet. It just depends on the breed itself.
So now we're going to talk a little bit about learning and training like I mentioned earlier. So learning is the modification of an individual's behavior as the result of interaction with the environment. So everyone can kind of understand that because when you're at school, let's say you're going to act differently than you do when you're at home because your environment is different and so your behavior is going to be modified to fit that environment.
So behavior sources, there are two different kinds that we are going to talk about today. So there's inherent behaviors, which is behavior that the animal is born knowing how to do, such as breathing or getting milk from its mama. Sometimes cats just know to go in the litter box, just different things like that. And learned behaviors is behavior that an animal must be taught how to do, like sitting, rolling over, things like that.
Potty training is a really big one. We teach our animals a lot of different behaviors, but they're also learning a lot of behaviors and we don't know that we're teaching them to. So for example, whenever I wear a specific pair of tennis shoes when I take my dog on a walk, he knows when I put those on that he gets really excited and he runs over to his leash. So he's learned that those shoes mean a walk and so he behaves differently. So it's a learned behavior.
So classifications of learning, there is classical or Pavlovian conditioning, which means a previously neutral stimulus can evoke a response that is reflex-like and involves the contraction of smooth muscle or secretion of glands. So I don't know if you guys are like me, but I really, really love pickles and just like dill pickles and just the taste of them. So sometimes even if the jar is empty, all I have to do is see it and my mouth will start watering. So that's an example of classical conditioning. So I know that if I see the pickle jar or any of the juice in there, that I might get a pickle. Basically how that works. And then there's operant conditioning, which is associative learning, and it's the expectation that two events are connected. So forms of operant conditioning are variations of associative learning, and the response of a particular behavior is coupled to a reward.
So like she mentioned with the pickle jar, what was actually done by Pavlov is he took a dog and a tuning fork. So a dog doesn't know what a tuning fork is, but it makes a very specific noise. So the first thing he did was he found that whenever he gave the dog his food, he would salivate at the mouth. And so whenever he got food, he would salivate. And so whenever he rang the tuning fork, nothing would happen. But when he started pairing his food with the tuning fork, the dog would start to salivate. So he would feed him and ring the fork at the same time. And so eventually, whenever he rang the fork, the dog would start to salivate because, like Chanel said, he started associating that tuning fork with getting something that he wanted, like food.
So observational learning is when you learn a task faster by watching another animal perform it first. So it's fewer errors than trial by error. So it's like if you have two dogs and one of them always ends up getting loose, he just like opens the gate, and then the next dog or your other dog ends up seeing that pet do that, he's gonna learn faster how to open the same gate. So it's basically if you see someone do something, then you can repeat it faster versus figuring it out on your own.
I don't know if any of you have kind of a bad dog that has a lot of bad habits and then a pretty good dog that doesn't have those habits, but if you put them together, that good dog will pick up those habits because he sees the other dog do it, and maybe that gets him food if he gets into the trash can or things like that. So they pick it up by watching it, and it's a really effective way of learning. So reinforcement is very important with training, and there's lots of different kinds. So positive reinforcers are going to be something that's added following a behavior. So usually equated with rewards and internally. So you can have primary or secondary. So primary is going to be meeting an animal's basic needs. So when you tell them to sit and you give them a treat, that's a primary reinforcement once they sit. The secondary reinforcement isn't related to basic needs. So it's whenever you tell your dog to sit, he sits, and then you pet him and say, good boy. He doesn't need your praise to live, but he likes it. So that's still going to be a positive reinforcement for him. And then the opposite of that is negative reinforcement. So that's going to be reinforcement when a negative is removed. So an easy example of that, because it's kind of a tricky concept, is to get a horse to move the direction that you want, you might squeeze your legs. So that's uncomfortable for the horse. So they move so that you'll stop squeezing them. So you're taking away something negative once they do what you want. So for example, a fearful dog will growl and you stop moving.
So bridging stimulus, it's used to connect action with reinforcement, just like clicker training. So sometimes you see service dogs or just people that are training their own pets, they train them with clickers. And what they're doing is bridging the stimulus. So the dog learns to associate the sound of a click with something that they're doing either correct or they get a treat with it. So it's learned through operant conditioning, and the first step in clicker training is teaching an animal to associate the clicker sound with the treat. And every time the click sounds, a treat is offered immediately. Next time, the click is used to signify that something good has happened. So if you see your dog and he's lying down and you want to teach him how to lie down, you might click then and then give him a treat. That way they know that is a good reward.
So there are a lot of different approaches to using these bridging stimuluses, and the three main ways to use this as a training device is, the first one is called capturing. So that's when you're going to catch the animal in the act of doing something that's desired, like Chanel said, laying down. And eventually the animal learns that you click when I'm laying down and I get a treat, okay, you must want me to lay down. So they figure out that laying down is a good thing. The second way is shaping. So that's when you gradually build a new behavior by rewarding each small step toward it. So to get a dog to roll over, the first thing they have to do is sit. So you'll reward when they sit, then you'll reward when they lay down, then you'll reward when they roll on one side, then you eventually reward them when they roll all the way over. So it's kind of a building process. And the last one is luring. So luring is going to be using the treat like a magnet to get the animal to move towards the desired position. So I know I've done that when I want my dog to step on a scale at the vet. You just hold a treat out in front of him and he'll walk pretty much wherever you want to go. So that's a really common way of doing it. And then so once the behavior is learned, the final step is to add a cue for the behavior, like a word or a hand signal. And then the animal will learn that the treat is on the way after completing the desired behavior, and you can get them to do what you want with just that word or hand signal, rather than still having to go through the steps of teaching them what you want them to do.
So with reinforcement, timing is very, very essential. So timing for reinforcers should be less than half a second. So ideal is 0.13 seconds to 0.27 seconds, that is immediately. And then half a second, 1 second, and 2 seconds, it results in decreased appropriation. So the longer you wait, the less of a connection it is for your dog to realize that what they're doing was either correct or bad. So if you come home after a long day and you see that your dog has torn into the trash, when you try and punish them for that, they're not going to really know what's going on. What they're going to be reacting towards is your behavior. Maybe your tone is going to change. and then they'll realize that something was wrong, but they're not going to know exactly what it is because you didn't catch them in the act, or the timing for the punishment wasn't immediately.
And so we've been talking a lot about dogs, but people use clicker training with every kind of animal. So there's a lot of videos on YouTube of cats that are trained with clickers, or even goldfish that are trained, horses. It's a really, really versatile training method. And so even though we've pretty much just mentioned dogs, this is very applicable to any sort of pet you may have. And you can always use it, and you can always kind of find more resources online about how to implement it in your different animals. So now we're going to go through a little bit of just why animals end up in the shelters to kind of prove to you how important training really can be.
So out of about 2,000 dogs that have been given up to the shelter, about 40% of them had at least one behavior problem. So the top one was house soiling, so they go to the bathroom inside the house. The second would be they're destructive outside, they're aggressive to people, they escape too much, they're too active, and they need too much attention.
So all these problems could pretty easily be fixed with proper training and proper behavioral modification, but a lot of people don't know how to do it, or they don't know the right way to do it. So like we said, if you just punish your dog when you get home from 8 hours at work for going to the bathroom inside the house, they don't know what they did wrong. If you're not home to take them out every time they need to go outside to potty train them, it's not really their fault, it's kind of your fault for not being home. So it's really important to know the way that animals think so that you can help fix their behaviors and get them to do exactly what you want them to do. So we actually have a list of the 7 deadly sins for cats as well on the next slide. And this study had 1,300 cats that were given back to the shelter, and 30% of those cats had at least one behavioral problem. And again, the top problem was the house soiling. So you can see how big of a problem this can be, and how that could cause an animal to be relinquished back to the shelter just because they couldn't be potty trained properly. So it's so important to understand how to train your dog or cat appropriately so that they can behave the way that you want and that they can be happy and healthy at home. So we have time for questions.
This goes back to the shaping behaviors. So in shaping, do you discontinue giving treats for the initial steps?
So the way that clicker training works is at the beginning, you want them to associate the click with the treat. So for a while, you'll just click, treat, click, treat, click, treat. But then you want to kind of start tapering off with every method. So you don't ever want to be giving your dog 30 treats a day every time you click. But you want to start with maybe every other, and then every 3 times. And then eventually it's just very rare that they would get a treat when you click, because they're going to just start associating that treat with you being proud of them and like that praise, that secondary reinforcement that we talked about. So the answer is that yes, you would want to start tapering off those treats. You don't want to keep giving them treats every time.
Thank you. When walking the dog outside, how can you train them not to attack another dog?
So aggression is kind of an interesting thing. Dogs can be aggressive in different ways. Some dogs are aggressive towards people, some dogs are aggressive to other animals, or some dogs may be aggressive, like possessive, so they can get aggressive when other animals or other people try and like take their food bowl or their toys or things like that. A dog that's aggressive on walks, it's going to be pretty hard to get them used to that, because of course you don't want to take them out for fear that they would attack another dog. But I would say the first step is to make sure that you have a really good bond with them while you walk, that they're healing, that they're at your side, that they're paying attention to you, not their surroundings. And then after that, I would say that you want to not reward their behavior. So if they do start barking at another dog, just turn around and go home, so that they understand that that's not appropriate. And you also maybe can stop and just make them sit when another dog is going by and make them focus on you, so that they're not focusing on their surroundings and they're not as distracted. Do you have any other ideas, Chanel?
I think you covered everything, yeah.
Possibly having a treat so that when they do sit down and focus on you while the other dog is passing by, like they get rewarded for paying attention to you and not the other dog.
Yeah, so if you have your clicker and maybe some treats with you, you can click when they sit, and when they're focused on you, you can reward that when they click in a treat, and so that they understand that they should be focusing on you, not focusing on the other dogs that are passing by.
On a signalment, whenever you take a dog to the veterinarian, there's depending upon the breed of the dog, different characteristics of the dog, you are looking for certain things that are likely to occur to different breeds. Why do different breeds have different problems from one another?
So what Dr. Johnson is saying is that whenever you're in the hospital, let's say that Chanel brings her dog to me, and I don't know what's wrong with him. I'm going to ask my colleagues. So I'm going to walk up to them and say, okay, this is Ajax, a 4-year-old castrated male German Shepherd. So immediately, who I'm talking to has an understanding of the dog's age, whether they've been castrated or spayed, and their sex, and their breed. So German Shepherds, let's say, well, he's limping a lot, and I just don't know what's wrong. You might jump to thinking, oh, they have hip dysplasia, because large breed dogs, they're more likely to have hip dysplasia. So different breeds of animals have different problems that they're more predisposed to genetically. So by giving that signalment as the preface of anything you're going to say about the animal, as veterinarians, we can kind of get in our mind what the common problems might be. Because there are actually some diseases that we really only see in a certain breed of dog or a certain breed of cat. Or maybe, for example, if it's a mass, if it's a young dog, we wouldn't think it's cancer. But if it's an 8-year-old Labrador, we might think that that's a cancer, like that mass is cancer. So it really influences how we think and kind of our process of choosing what illnesses it may have based on its age and its sex and its breed.
So how would that relate back to what you said before about your selection of the dog? You want a big head, small head, large dog, small dog. How does that relate to giving them a certain ailment?
So what that means is whenever we bred our animals to be specific breeds, there was kind of a decent amount of inbreeding. So the way that we got our dogs to look specific ways, we may have bred pretty close relatives together. So because of that, they didn't have much genetic variation, and so they're more predisposed to having different illnesses because it might really actually be in their genes. So like I said, large dogs are more likely to have hip dysplasia because they have bigger bones, and so they just have that problem more often. Whereas small dogs, like Boston Terriers and Pugs, the dogs with the really big eyes, those eyes are actually more likely to really pop out or get really dry and have ulcers on them. And so the way that our dogs look, the way that we bred them to look or act, or their size or shape, like Dr. Johnson said, that can predispose them to different problems. And what's really interesting is as soon as you breed a purebred dog with kind of a mutt, like a mixed breed dog, their puppies don't have the same problems. So all they really need is kind of new DNA, and some of those problems can actually fix themselves. So there's a lot of merit to getting a mixed breed dog from a shelter or from a rescue, because they might have a lot less genetic problems than our purebred dogs could have. But there are some purebred dogs that live completely healthy lives. So it's really just dependent on the dog. It's not a steadfast rule. And we also actually have an additional activity that goes along with this presentation.
So basically with this activity, you'll have one student that will volunteer to be the dog in this scenario, and the rest of the class is going to be the trainers. So we will pass out clickers, or if you guys don't have clickers, you can replace that with snapping or clapping. And those will be basically like our sounds that the dogs would listen for. So our student or our tribute would be sent out into the hallway, and the rest of the class will decide on an action that they want the student to accomplish, whether it's walking down a certain row of desks and sitting on one, or tapping someone's shoulder, or sitting down, or grabbing an eraser, just different things like that. So what the students would do is when they walk into the room, their only focus is the little clicks or the snaps that are going on. So they only get rewarded if they're doing something correctly. So if they're walking down the correct aisle that they're supposed to, they'll be hearing all the clicks, and then you can also reinforce that behavior with candy, give some of them if they're doing it correctly. But what the students would be focusing on is trying to figure out what the task is.
Yeah, so we can kind of try and give a little example. We can't be too mobile, but the first thing would be, so if I was the dog and Chanel was my trainer, let's say she wanted me to pick up this clicker. So what would happen is I would walk in the room, and if I was walking towards the clicker, what would you do?
I'd be snapping because she's doing something good. She's doing something that I want her to do.
So I know I'm doing the right thing because I'm getting rewarded. So I walk towards it, and then I stop. And maybe when I start reaching towards it, she would start snapping again. So I figure out that that's what she wants me to do. And once I do the task, there's no more snapping, and there's just a reward. So what we did is we would give the kid a piece of candy, or you can just kind of
good job,
do anything, the praise, the secondary reinforcement. But anything like that fits in, and it's really hard when you're the one who doesn't know what you need to do and you just walk into a room and everyone's staring at you and you have to try and figure out what to do to keep clicking. It can be really difficult, and it's a good way for students to understand what that training is like and what it's like for you not to understand what's wanted of you. You just have to kind of figure it out yourself. So it's a pretty interesting game, and every group that we've done it with has really enjoyed it. And it really kind of hits home how the training really works.
All right, that's all we have. But thank you all for joining us, and we will see you next time.